All right. Welcome. It is finally time. We got to meet each other finally live. This
Absolutely.
is great. How are you doing?
I'm doing well. How are you?
I'm doing well. It's been a weekend, as you know, and we have a lot to talk about. This
We
is
sure
great.
do. Do.
Read.
We do.
Weather's up and down, but nice for March, even though it's going to get colder here, and it's been nice there. But yeah, you're doing okay.
Yeah, doing okay. Getting a little taste of spring, which has been a welcome relief after this winter. We've both had brutal winters. So
Yeah,
yeah, it's been nice to have a bit of a break. So
yeah, for sure, for sure. So, do you want to get started? I have kind of I know I was laughing when I was on the way back from St. Louis with my wife. I said, I am going to host a live stream with a former teacher, and I guarantee you she is going to have an outline and notes and everything else. And here I am trying to be prepared. This
uh,
would be interesting. So, feel free to jump in and correct me where I'm wrong. And yeah,
none of that. None of that. We're just gonna have a conversation, right?
So we're here to talk about the Blackboard Jungle by Evan Hunter,
Yes.
and we both have the same 50th anniversary editions. Yeah,
Yes. Yep. Yep.
yeah,
Thrift books. Yeah.
yes, for the win, thrift books. Yeah. So this story is was created by an author that I have grown kind of endeared towards,
Yeah.
and he's an interesting character. I'll give you a little bit of author insights, and I know you know some of this, Pat. But so this was written under Evan Hunter, which is a pen name for Ed McBain, which is also actually a pen name as well because the actual person was born Salvatore Lambino, and he actually changed his name. He wrote under multiple names, but most famously under Ed McBain because he is the creator of the iconic 87th Precinct crime series, which I know Pat, you've talked about a lot on on your channels as we were coming on to this live event.
Right.
I've talked a lot about it as well,
Right.
and so some other author insights. McBain is known for gritty realism, fast-paced storytelling, which definitely captivates a lot of people, including myself. But he was also a screenwriter as well, including working with Alfred Hitchcock on, I believe it was The Birds, that iconic movie. So
Wow.
I got hooked on McBain. Just a little bit of a shout out here because of Ollie at Criminale, because he did a lot of videos about the 87th precinct, and
Right.
so that's how I kind of got hooked on this. So,
Right.
and we've already got a lot of people in, in the chat.
Awesome.
So we have got Scott.
Hi,
Is this?
Scott.
We've got Julie Hughes.
Hi, Julie.
Hello, Julie. Stuart from Stuart Griffin.
Hey, Stuart.
Brian, we were just talking about you, Brian. Careful, Pat. He said, Ghost Reader in the Sky. Hello.
Hey, Greg.
And then, Brian, is this really you? Okay, I knew this was going to happen. It's Mike to you, Scott. Yeah. We had during our, I think it was Book Bros, someone came in, we were like, who is that person? And like everyone started calling everyone Mike. And so that's how that came about.
Oh, that's funny.
But okay, so if you are not familiar with this book, I'm going to give you a high level summary, and obviously Pat can jump in here and tell me if I miss anything. But this book was written in 1954. It is the premise of this. It's set in a rough vocational high school in the inner city of New York City. The novel follows the main character, Rick Dadier. He's a veteran. He's trying to build a stable life as a teacher. He has a wife at home. He's a teacher in the 1950s. He quickly discovers that this school, I believe it's North Manual Trades, is both chaotic and filled with gang influence, racial tension, apathy, violence. Dadier struggles to maintain order, and most importantly, I think one of the themes was he struggles to reach his students. It's a very hostile, disruptive education system. It's very broken. There's personal stress, not only with his work as a teacher, as we learn about as we read the story, but also stress at home with his wife being newly pregnant. And the story basically builds towards a kind of violent confrontation that forces Rick Dadier to decide what kind of a teacher, kind of a man he'll be, kind of thing. So, anything you want to add there? Or did I?
That's a good summary of the basic premise of the novel.
Okay. So, a couple of interesting facts I wanted to point out before we kind of talk about some of our favorite parts, some of the themes. So, it was published in 1954, and I think Pat has some of these interesting facts probably herself. It was considered very shocking because it had a very raw depiction of what school systems were, especially a depiction of public schools.
Yes.
It's based on actually Evan Hunter's real experience as a teacher.
Yes.
Which I thought was interesting. It helped define school drama as a genre, which I thought was an interesting kind of aside. And then it tackled issues like racial tension, juvenile delinquency, well before they were commonly addressed in kind of the mainstream kind of fiction as well. So really kind of iconic almost in a way, because I don't think anyone took the time to go and make the jump and say, hey, schools are somewhat broken and teachers are kind of on an island and not represented or supported enough, which I have a lot to talk about when it comes to that. But yeah, that's kind of the interesting facts. What did you find?
No, I think you're absolutely right. I think this was, the first, book to take on some of these issues. And he was writing from his own experience. I mean, he had a very short-lived teaching career, and you can kind of understand why. I mean, this is not an autobiography, but it is based on his experience, and you can see why he would have decided to go do something else, because it certainly does not make the teaching profession look appealing or like inviting.
Right.
You get the feeling, I mean, my heart was breaking for these young teachers who came in with such idealism and hope, and thinking they were going to do these great things, and they just met obstacle after obstacle. I mean, the kids were impossible, but like you said, the system was so broken, and and the administration was awful and not supportive, and you don't even know where to begin to try to improve upon this broken system. So that it made me very sad to think of young teachers coming into this kind of a setting, because there was nobody to help them.
Did you at any, I'm assuming this is, you're going to say yes, but did you have any kind of flashbacks to your teaching career when you were reading some of this and think, I kind of went through that as well?
Well, my very first real teaching job after college, after student teaching, was in a private girls' school. And so there was nothing like what this book is dealing with. They were very motivated kids. It was a very supportive faculty. It was like a great place to learn how to teach. And so I didn't have anything like that when I started. But after 7 years, I moved over to a public school, and it was also a very good school system. But I got a teaching assignment in my first year that was actually made by administration to get my predecessor to retire. So that, that idea of an administration that is not trying to help teachers, but actually trying to, and so I got like 5 very difficult classes. And so nothing like what this book is dealing with, but that did ring a little bit of, familiar for me, that going into something and just feeling like, oh boy, I'm not in Kansas anymore, and I remember on the first day of school, a veteran teacher took a look at my class lists And he said to me, "Are you a praying woman, Pat?" And I said, "Why are you saying that?" And he said, "Because you better say in your prayers now." And I was just like, what have I done? What have I gotten myself into? But he just saw
Right.
some names on my list, and, nothing that happened to me was anything like what's in this book. But that feeling in the beginning that I am not prepared for this and nobody here is going to help me, that
Right.
that felt a little bit familiar.
Yeah. Brian says, well, I was prepared to make some flip remarks, but this sounds all serious and socially conscious.
uh, uh,
Julie, it's fascinating hearing this detailed story about Pat's teaching experience at the public school. And yes, I am very blessed to be buddy reading this with someone like Pat because of that, for sure. I will say like this for my daughters, some of the stuff I hear from my daughter, and obviously, there's a confidentiality type thing there as well. But like her biggest fear was, how does she address kids that are moved through the educational system versus dealing that from former teachers that aren't dealing with individual need. And I think that's probably a constant in any public school district.
right.
But that was her biggest fear. And so when I was reading some of this, obviously, like you said, it's dramatically, overstated, but real for an inner city, but not in a public setting in Illinois, in rural Illinois. No, those challenges are different for sure.
Yeah. But you do have kids. I mean, you do get kids who have been pushed through a system because somebody's not doing,
Right.
the best for that kid somewhere along the line. I mean, I'm sure your daughter encounters
Yeah.
that. You have kids with all kinds of skill levels in an elementary school class. You've got everybody in there, and you have to figure out how to teach them. So,
Yep, for sure. So I will say this for our people here or anyone that's viewing, we're probably going to get into a little bit of spoilers here. So if you're wanting to read this and you don't want to know specific things, you might want to shy away. But I did want to touch on themes, and I know themes is kind of an easy out, but I think they're very, very important here. And so I have two specific I wanted to point out. One was hope versus cynicism. It is heavily in this book. And some of the more funny parts, I found some of the parts of the teachers, and you had teachers in the book that were male, and they were all men in their teacher's lounge, and they were talking about different things. Some of the things I didn't agree with, which we could talk about. Some of the things, though, were almost funny, but there was a lot of cynicism, especially from Solly versus Rick Dadier, who just wanted to connect and invest in the kids.
Right.
That is a huge theme throughout this whole story.
Yes.
Would you agree?
Absolutely. Absolutely. There is this is a great portrait of teacher burnout. When you look at a lot of those, veteran teachers who just say all those very cynical things in the teacher's room, and, they're clearly not thinking that they're going to make any change or have any effect on students' lives. They want to survive. They want to get their paycheck. They know the system is broken. No hope whatsoever.
Right.
And then you have Rick and Josh, his friend, the other young teacher, who are all hope and optimism, and thank God we have them in, because they actually believe that they're going to be able to do something.
Yeah. The other kind of theme that I thought too, Pat, was the breakdown of authority. Like the institution is very out of control. Like I was very, you have the principal Small, I think was his name. And so he was very like, when he interviewed Dadier, he was like, we don't have a problem here.
Yeah.
But like he is delusional because there is a huge problem. And so that creates a very interesting kind of perspective, because I would think even in schools outside of the inner city and in a vocational structure, there is schools in a public structure where a person that is very high in the administration is not as in tune with what's really going on at the classroom level. And so that was an interesting for a book written in the 50s to kind of, create that dynamic that is still true today and probably sadly in some regard. So I thought that was interesting.
Yes, I did too.
Yeah.
He says there's no problem in this school because he turns a blind eye to a lot of what's going on there.
Right.
And nobody's helping these kids, and nobody's helping these struggling teachers either.
Right.
So.
Yeah. Hello, Albert. Brian says, to speak seriously, my father taught some shop, automotive, and technology classes along with mathematics. They were treated as dumping grounds for troubled kids, so he dealt with some of this. I can imagine that. Leslie from Book Skurs and Purrs.
Hi, Leslie.
And then we have Julie. I'm drawing parallels with the autobiography To Sir with Love by E.R. Braithwaite.
Yes, very similar.
Okay.
Very similar.
Yeah.
And interestingly, in the film, Sidney Poitier is the teacher in To Sir with Love. And of course, he's
actually Greg Miller.
Gregory Miller, one of the problem students.
That was interesting. And it talks about in the movie, and I don't want to jump into kind of those because we'll talk about the movie in a little bit, but Miller in the book, Dadier realizes that Miller has a IQ that's far exceeds some of these other kids.
Yes.
And obviously he tries to partner with him in the book in the very beginning to try to say, because especially after he sees like the class goes along with Miller.
Right.
And so he's kind of hoping that maybe he can get him to kind of, sing his tune and the class will follow kind of thing. I thought that was interesting.
Yeah.
So.
And that resonated with me. I understood that. You try to, who you have to get on your side. And when you get that kid on your side, then your work is going to be easier.
Sure.
Because they're going to help you. But he, it took a long time in the novel for him to really get Greg on his side. He did eventually, but it was certainly not by simply saying to him, "You're a leader and I want you to, to help me here." That didn't do it. He had to really prove himself to Greg. So
yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
Nicole, hello there. I'm late, but still happy to be here. I didn't have a great time in school until I got to college. I had way too many bad experiences with lower education. I was a problem student. LOL. Nicole, I cannot imagine you being a problem, but yeah, interesting. Thanks for sharing.
I am sorry to hear that. Nicole has talked about some of her school experiences or her experiences with reading in school in some of her videos. Yeah. I'm sorry that you had bad experiences, because a teacher can make a huge difference in your life.
And honestly, too, that was one of the things with Carly in her class and the buddy reads with the class, she had some individual students that struggled with comprehension. And so it was like, okay, how can we make this fun? And she was like, and I was like, well, I could do a video, it's been a huge hit. We're getting ready to do our 4th kind of read along next month. And so, it's been interesting.
I have told you, and I will tell you on every video that you do with Carly's class, these kids are going to remember this forever. They're going to remember being in Carly's class, and they're going to remember Carly's dad coming and reading with us. And they are going to talk about that when they're grown men and women, somewhere. They're going to talk about, being in that class and how reading changed for them, or, something clicked. I'm telling you, you are making a very powerful impression.
Yeah, well, I appreciate that. I was in behavioral speech education and was almost a juvie. So, yes, I was. But how they treat students that are different, that weren't good at all where I was at. Yeah, I can imagine that.
I'm sorry. Yeah.
I calmed way down by 9th grade, but 3rd through 8th grade was not great at all. Yeah. I wasn't really, I don't know about you, but I was not a very avid reader until high school. Okay. I just wasn't. I remember telling Carly the other day, in fifth grade, I read Charlie and the Chocolate Factory, and I remember that vividly. But until like my senior year, I did not read a lot unless I had to.
But then you read Michael Crichton and everything changed, right?
Jurassic Park, everything changed after I read that. Yeah, for sure. Yeah. Interesting.
No, I was a reader. I mean, I was a reader since I was a little kid. And then more so in high school because I connected with my English teachers. They were who I wanted to be. So, something powerful happened early on for me. But
yeah, that's interesting. Yeah, I mean, we all kind of have a different journey when it comes to reading, and obviously. So I was wondering, before I jump into kind of some major plot points, there's one I'm kind of remiss on because it's one of my favorite parts, and I always kind of get fixated on some of the mundane and trivial things, but I don't know how you felt about this. So at the beginning of the story, Dadier goes in for an interview, and he meets a guy that he actually went to school with.
Yes, yeah.
Jerry, I think was his name.
Yeah.
And so Jerry goes in, and like it's a really quick interview. He comes out, and it doesn't look real good. Then Dadier goes in. He gets into the interview. He ends up quoting like Henry the Fourth or something from Shakespeare or something like that. They give him the job. He comes out. Jerry doesn't get the job.
Right.
But later, when Dadier is going through all of the strife and struggles of the class, he reflectively, in hindsight's 2020, he's like, Jerry made out like a bandit because Jerry got a job at a really nice school and he's not have to deal with this. But like, it was interesting that kind of always clicked with me.
Yeah. Yep.
Was there any part of the book that really stood out for you? You kind of enjoyed because it reminded you of something like that? What you had this, like, it may have been trivial, but you kind of picked up on it.
I mean, there were many things in this book that, I made note of because they made me feel so powerfully. The Josh character was I just and he's an important minor character, but his whole struggle just resonated with me because he's not going to make it, that he's not going to be successful, but he keeps trying, and I just found his arc heartbreaking. Because he's going to try everything because all he wants to do is teach, and these kids are going to eat him alive. And you almost want to, like from off stage, you want to yell, no, Josh, don't do that. It's
when he brought his records in, I thought, oh boy. Yeah. Well, for those of you watching, like Pat finished the book ahead of me, and so I was texting Pat like, hey, I just finished this. I'm enjoying it. Here's what's happened. She already was well aware of it, and she was very restrained in what she was telling me, knowing that I was going to be reading it. But yeah, the Josh character, like, I remember you saying, oh, it's so heartbreaking. And I was kind of getting those vibes, but then when that all happened, I was like, oh, I completely understand.
Right.
But yeah.
I mean,
go ahead.
Two guys, I mean, they get beaten up by a bunch of kids, and that doesn't turn Josh off. He still is optimistic after that. He's not defeated. And then the scene with his records, where he brings the records in because he thinks that will get them. That will get the kids to want to learn, or, I'll win them over, and they destroy him and they destroy the records. And that's what does him in, because his most sincere effort is they just stomp all over it. That's worse than being beaten up in the, in an alleyway.
Yeah. And I'm glad they had that part in the movie, because I think that was a pivotal part. They don't really have the inner reflections after that. I know Rick talks to Anne, I think it's Anne or Annie, his wife, about Josh leaving. But in the book, there's a lot of conversation between the wife and Rick about that and how important it was. But I'm glad they kept that in the movie. Nicole, I did a great job in English and at PE, but that's about it. Oh, struggle bus for everything else.
Oh, I'm sorry, Nicole.
Stuart, the section where Josh's records were broken was devastating. I agree. I agree.
I mean, that was one of the saddest things in the book, I thought,
I did too. Yeah.
Yeah.
I did too. So I wanted to kind of highlight some of the major parts here. So at the beginning, Dadier starts teaching at North Manual Trades High School. He's very gung ho. He's wanting to get in there. He's really wanting to teach the kids. Reality hits. There's disrespect, intimidation. The classroom is completely disorderly almost immediately.
Yeah.
There's definitely a student power struggle. Students like Artie West, Greg Miller, they dominate kind of the classroom, and they take over some of any type of lessons that Dadier tries to impose on the kids.
Right.
There's tension and violence and threats, and then escalated violence that happens. Teachers feel powerless. They're unsupported. You know, as you mentioned, Josh and Rick, after they they went drinking after work, talking about, what they're wanting to do, talking about trying to connect with the kids. And the next thing that happens, they get jumped in an alleyway and beaten up severely.
Very bad.
And so after that, then you have personal crisis. You have a lot of stress at home for Rick's and his wife. He starts getting, or the missus gets letters about him and Mrs. Hammond.
Right.
And so that is very concerning. He obviously, he gets really upset about that. There's false accusations, mistrust. There's a lot of Dadier, finally towards the end, standing up to the students. I think he earns a degree of respect towards the end, but what he has to go through to get that, rather than some of that being given by the students, really creates a very dark and kind of ominous read. I mean, it really is.
It is.
So I thought that was interesting. You want to talk a little bit about the movie? I have some interesting kind of facts about it. So for those of you out there, Pat and I decided, hey, if we get the chance this week, which we both did, we were going to rent the movie off of YouTube. We both watched it. So the movie is titled Blackboard Jungle, and it was directed in 1955 by Richard Brooks, starring Glenn Ford, who played Rick Dadier, Sidney Poitier. He is actually portrays Greg Miller, which is another main character from the classroom perspective. And it was actually an early breakout role. What I found out is that Sidney was actually like in his mid-20s, but played a 17-year-old or 16-year-old kid.
Late 20s. I think he was 28.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so that was interesting. And he does a great job, I think, honestly. I was telling Pat before we got in here that I have not seen a black and white movie in a long time. But it was interesting. Definitely you can see between what we see today, out there versus this, it's hugely different and hugely different. The direction is very different, but that was interesting. Vic Morrow, which I don't know, is probably a pretty well-known actor back then. He was the violent student Artie West, and Margaret Hayes played Miss Hammond.
Yes.
So I thought that was interesting. So some interesting facts about the movie. Because the movie is almost iconic as the book in a way. So it was the first film to depict urban school violence in a more realistic manner. It helped launch Sidney Poitier's career.
Right.
And this was interesting too. And I noticed it at the very beginning, but I didn't make the connection until I looked online. But the very beginning of the movie plays Rock Around the Clock in the opening credits, which this was one of the first major films to play a rock and roll song.
Yes.
Yep. What I thought was really interesting.
Isn't that a great fact about this?
I know. So it also sparked controversy. They actually had rioting over some of this movie in places, which I thought was really interesting.
Yeah, there were places where it couldn't even be shown. It was completely, blackballed.
And in today's, I don't know what you thought, but in today's kind of what we see, it's very, very tame. There's a lot in the book that was not depicted in the movie that there's no way could have.
Right.
Which we'll talk about.
Yeah.
So that was interesting. It was filmed in New York for authenticity, which makes a lot of sense.
Good.
It faced censorship challenges due to its depiction of youth violence,
Mhm.
and it became a cultural touchstone for discussions about education in the 50s, which I thought was
Mm.
interesting.
Yeah.
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 So
Did you find
let's
anything
talk.
in your research about
Yeah.
the film about the famous Santini character? Did you find out anything about him?
No.
This was really interesting. Santini is the kid in the class who he just smiles all the time, and
Yes.
nobody told Rick, that he had this kid who really is, he's just very, very disabled. I would say he
Yes.
has all kinds of learning disabilities, and he just smile. I mean, he's a very pleasant kid. He's not a problem in the class
No.
at all, but he just smiles all the time. He doesn't really know what he's even being asked to do half the time. And in the film, he actually has a heroic role that he didn't quite have in the novel. But in the credits for the film, he is listed as Jamil Farah, and he was a 19-year-old kid. Well, Jamil Farah would turn out to be Jamie Farr, who was Klinger in MASH.
Interesting.
Isn't that interesting? I think he's one of probably the only people from this film who's still living. I mean, he's in his 90s now, but that Santini character is Klinger.
You know what? I was really young when MASH came out, but it was a very popular show. Thinking about it now, thinking about some of those images of the characters, I've seen it on our TV before.
Yeah.
That kid, his facial structures, that totally makes sense
Makes
now.
sense. And I didn't realize it watching the film. I did not realize that. I'm like, I mean, I thought the actor played it really well, but I had no idea that it was him. And then when I read that, I was like, oh, I had to go back and look at it again. But it's Jamie Farr. And that's an iconic role that he would play later. I mean, MASH is on in reruns all the time now, but I thought that was very interesting. He was 19 when the film was made.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Nicole, but if it doesn't happen to your loved ones, okay, I missed one. Here, let me go back. People want to hide what's really going on and get all upset when it's shown, but it is happening all the time, every single day. Yeah, I think so. But if it doesn't happen to you or your loved ones, it doesn't exist. It isn't my problem until it affects you. It's so incredibly annoying.
Mhm.
I agree. People are almost always incredibly shocked when I talk about even 5% of what I see, heard, or went through in school. The privilege is so real.
Mm.
Yeah, I can completely understand that for sure. Leslie, I love MASH, although I was probably too young to really understand what was going on.
Mm.
Yeah, I'm probably the same, Leslie. But yes, I remember that face, and now that Santini character, it's totally sense.
Yeah, I just thought that was, that I just thought that was really interesting. So
he's got one of those faces that reminds me of like the LaRusso character from like Karate Kid. Like that looks the same.
yeah,
Though he's older.
Yeah.
But yeah, that's interesting.
Yep.
So before we talk about some movie book differences, one of the big ones, and I know this was kind of a sticking point for you in the book, was the depiction of female.
Right. That's one of the things I wanted us to be able to talk about.
So let's talk about it.
That was the biggest problem I had with the novel. I was all in for what it had to say about finding a way to reach, difficult students. I was all in for what it had to say about, young teachers not being supported in a system. But I thought the depiction of women, and there are two main women characters in the novel, I thought they were caricatures. I didn't think they were real women. And, I was angry when I, read it. There's a sexual assault that takes place on the first day of school.
Yep.
There is a young, new female teacher, Miss Hammond, and one of these kids gets her in the library and locks the door, and he is sexually assaulting her on the first day of school. And Rick comes to her rescue. I mean, he breaks the door down basically and prevents the rape from happening. He is assaulting her. He has her clothes ripped off, but the rape doesn't happen. But it was described in a way that was trying to be, I thought titillating. I thought he was trying to, he gave a sexualized description of a sexual assault, and that got my back up. And then when Rick talked about it at home, his wife didn't take the woman's side. His wife said, well, she asked for it.
Yeah.
And basically said that she was probably dressed provocatively. And, I was writing all over the margins. I mean, I was going out of my mind about this because I thought the angry, jealous wife blaming the woman who almost gets raped, I thought that was not true to how a woman would really feel upon hearing about this. And then Miss Hammond, who is rescued, she then becomes sort of a seductress, almost making what the wife said true.
Yeah.
Now she's going after Rick and she's trying to seduce him. So the wife was right in her view. And I thought these are two caricatures of women. This is not how women would really be in this situation. This isn't how the wife would have really felt, so that really, I had a real problem with that. So.
Did you feel like the wife, Dadier's wife, the pregnancy things where she was she didn't feel like she was pretty enough. She didn't feel like, especially when, and then you add in the anonymous letters, and she's starting to have this doubt about, well, he probably doesn't like me because I'm 9 months pregnant. And do you think that was a typical woman response to that? Or do you think it was just, again, he was forcing kind of a plot drama that really wasn't realistic?
That's what I thought. I mean, that's what I wrote in the margins over that. I was like, this is not how pregnant women feel. This isn't what a pregnant woman thinks about herself. Right. And she's sure that her husband isn't attracted to her anymore. So of course he's going to wander. That's not what married couples are like.
Right.
I just thought, I thought both women. I thought the portrayal of both women in the book was just off. And I didn't know who he was writing that for,
Yeah. Here's
a guy reading that because, I know it bothered you too,
No, for sure. For sure. Well, a couple things that bothered me, obviously you have a sexual assault of a teacher. So that really hit home. So, I have girls, and then you have, he continues to mention it. It's talked about in the male teacher's lounge, because the teacher's lounge, and this is a difference in the book and movie, and I don't want to waste too many of my differences, but in the movie, there's women and men in the same lounge. In the book, they're separate.
Right.
Because Manners, who is, I think, a PE teacher or sub, he is very, very chauvinistic towards women. He kept joking about, I want to get, he talks about Mrs. Hammond after the incident. He talks about wanting to go to an all-girls school.
Right.
Very, I think that when he was writing that, he was trying to create some realism in a male-dominated kind of lunchroom, but still, that in today's society would never fly.
Right.
Never fly.
Right.
But so after the incident, though, some issues I have with it is a couple. They kept referring to the rape all throughout the story. Like, you would hear the word rape was used multiple times.
Mm-hmm.
And so it's like, why are we rehashing that? That was bad enough. And so as a reader, I was like, I want to put that past me and see if this is going to go to something substantial and meaningful. Right. So not to shove it under the rug type thing. But like as a reader, you're wanting to, let's read about something that's meaningful. I'm not trying to like put that aside. That was one problem. The other problem I had is that when he wrote that in his fictional book, he wrote that and then didn't really do anything with Miss Hammond, like you said, but made her a seducer.
Right. He turned her into exactly what, which she wasn't. She was a victim. Right. And even the description of it, he described the description of the assault in a sexually provocative way.
Sure.
I thought he's doing this for his reader. I mean, nobody would describe a rape in a sexual. Rape is not a sexual experience. It's an assault. And he described some of her body parts in a very provocative way. And I thought he's trying to excite his reader with this. But then she turns around and she becomes, in effect, somebody who's looking for it. She goes after Rick.
And the whole thing where she says, I'm bored.
Yeah.
In the movie and the book, like, I'm bored. Like, that was the most exciting time I've had in my first year teaching.
Mm-hmm.
I thought, wow.
Mm-hmm.
That was another thing that I caught. I was like, really?
Yeah.
So,
yeah.
Sadly, Pat, I've heard exactly what the wife/woman thinks about SA. Not a lot. About 3 times in my life, but it was out there when I was a kid in the early 2000s. Thankfully, it's better now. Brian, I have as well, Nicole. It's always troubling to hear, to say the least. Stuart says, it seemed to me he turned Miss Hammond into a male fantasy.
That's exactly what he did. That's exactly what he did in the book. Yep.
Yeah, for sure. Very troubling treatment of women, even with the 1950s, is horrible.
Yes.
I'm glad you said that, Julie, because it is horrible. And I'm not excusing it, but I will tell you, in the 7th Precinct series, what I've read so far, some of the women characters are fantastic.
Are they?
Like, oh yeah, like Steve Carell's wife Teddy. She is a deaf mute, fantastic character.
Wow.
Hard as I would love a story just about her. And I've read a couple where she's a bigger character in the story of the 7th Precinct, and they're fantastic books.
Wow, that's great. Well, this is very early in his career. I mean, this is very early. Is this his first novel? It might.
I believe it is. I think it is, but it's I think
before the 87th Precinct.
Sure, absolutely. Yeah.
So he's, early on. I think he didn't know yet who his audience was or who he was writing for, because, Stuart's absolutely right. This was written to be. You're trying to describe something horrible, but you're describing it in a sexually provocative way. And that turned me off as a woman reader. And, it bothered you as a male reader as well. You said, I have daughters, I have a wife, so I didn't think he did women well in the book. I thought he needed work.
Yeah. And well, like you said, the main 2 women are Rick's wife, who has these conflicting self-esteem thoughts about it based on her pregnancy, which you said wasn't a realistic view of a woman, how a pregnant woman would be. And then you have Miss Hammond. The funny thing too, well, not funny, but the thing that also I thought was interesting, after he set up, like at the very beginning, he captures you with this event with Miss Hammond in the library. She becomes this seducer type person, but towards the end of the story, when you get into kind of the major conflict, she is not around.
No. Completely. Yeah, so I think these are imperfections in the novel.
Sure.
I don't think he, he was figuring it out, I think, as he was going along.
Yeah. So let's talk about some movie versus book differences.
Okay.
So I mentioned the lunchroom, or the kind of like the teacher's lounge. In the book, they're separated. Men and women are, and I don't believe at any time that the women's lunchroom there was any kind of discussion. It was all around the men's lunchroom.
Right.
But you had Manners, you had Solly, who's very cynical about this whole thing.
Yes.
Trying to keep Dadier's expectations really low, that these are animals and you're just trying to survive your days. And then you have that. And so that was a huge difference. The other differences I saw The principal in the movie is named Warnicki,
Yeah.
and the principal in the book is named Small.
Mm-hmm.
And I wanted to point that out because it also creates another discussion point. Two other things in the book that, besides the Miss Hammond issues, that really stood out to me was the fact that up until like the middle of the book, I'm sitting there thinking, you know, these disruptive kids, some of them are part of the gangs, there's violence and everything going on. Where are the parents?
Yeah. Yeah.
And finally, you get a brief nod to a parent, you know, mention of parents. And I also was asking, like, where's the administration? I thought Mr. Small told Dadier, there's no behavioral issues here at this school.
Yeah.
And it's immediate. So I thought that was interesting.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Some of the other differences, obviously, you know, the sexual assault with Miss Hammond in the book is very graphic. It's more detailed. You couldn't do that in a 1955 film. There's just no way.
No.
So that was very different. And I had a question for you. So I noticed this and I couldn't recall in the book. So in the movie, he goes back to meet his college professor and mentor for guidance. Was that in the book?
No.
Okay.
No. And I thought that was an interesting scene in the movie too, because they're on this like, you know, pristine campus and he says, well, anybody could teach here, you know, like these are, these are, you know, kids, this kind of kid is easy to teach. You know, that was not in the book.
Yeah. Julie, yes, Blackboard Jungle was Hunter's debut novel.
Okay.
Good to know. Thank you. Nick from Hide and Read, Kevin put his fancy shirt on. This is serious.
Very serious discussion we're having here.
Yeah. What other movie book differences did you see? Did you write any down? Because I have more.
I did.
Okay.
There was one, and I don't want to spoil the end of, but the big fight in the end, in the, you know, the last. Well, there are two things that I wanted to talk about, but this one, when, you know, when West, you know, comes at him with the knife, and I guess Balazzi is sort of in on that with him. The kid who saves the day in the film was the Santini, you know, the smiling kid who never seems to know what's going on. And while it was, you know, he comes at him with the American flag.
I know. I wrote that down. I thought, oh wow, we're really gonna we're Americana in this movie, huh?
Yeah. But, you know, I thought that touch was a little over the top, but
Agreed.
I did like that it was the Santini character.
I did too.
Who was a part of the rescue, because all along, you know, he's treated like he's just some kind of
not there.
Like he's not there, like he doesn't know what's going on, and he's just like this smiling kid in the back of the room, and you know, but he ends up being one of the heroes. So I actually liked that. You know, it was a little cheesy, but I liked that. So
I did too. I noticed that too. I had that written down. It was Santini in the American flag thing. I thought, oh, they're really. It's interesting. Like in 1955, the Stars and Stripes comes to save the day type thing. Kind of, that was interesting.
Right.
There was a couple others I saw too. Manners is not even mentioned in the movie. You know, like he is very womanizing, makes all these lewd comments in the teacher's lounge, the male teacher's lounge.
Right.
Not in the movie whatsoever, which that probably made sense for back then.
Yeah. Think of what he was saying in the, you know, I mean, he's saying, I want to get transferred to a girls' school. And he says it in graphic detail. About what he hopes to do when he gets there. I mean, you know?
There was definitely some trigger warnings on some of the language for sure.
Yeah.
In the movie, Miller knew Dadier would ask him and his friends to sing in the Christmas show.
Yeah.
Where in the book, Miller asked Dadier to get permission, or he asked Dadier, and Dadier has to get permission, I think, from the principal.
Yes.
For them to be like that. They were like the singing angels, and they were actually really good. And so when you're reading that part of the story, you're like, oh, okay, Miller's finally Dadier's going to straighten everything out, which is not what ends up happening.
No.
I thought that was interesting.
Yeah.
And then in the movie, okay, so there's a really key scene where Dadier believes he's breaking through And so it's an allegory. And so the allegory in the movie, they're playing a video about Jack and the Beanstalk.
Right.
In the book, it was about a fantasy story, wasn't it? Like it was about some guy. It was some kind of story where it was different.
It was Sir Gawain. It was Sir Gawain and the Green Knight, I think.
Yes, I think you're right.
Let me see.
Yes, and so the allegory thing, the kids kind of connected with, and he was like, "I finally did it. I finally connected with the kids."
Yeah. The breakthrough. Yeah. It was Gawain. It was Gawain. Yeah, and that's on page 402. So it takes that long to finally break through.
There was a couple other small differences too. I noticed in the movie, Sully Klein's character, the negative kind of cynical teacher, his name is Jim Murdoch in the movie, which was weird.
Yeah.
There's a pretty big spoiler too in the movie. So in the book, Daddy's wife, she goes into labor.
Right.
Something happens that's very horrible. Another horrible thing that happens to the Dadier family.
Right.
In the movie, it's completely different.
Yes.
Completely different. And so I'm assuming the producers are like, we cannot do that.
Yeah.
Because it would be too dark, too ominous, and you're never going to get it to be able to be seen on screen.
And that was exactly how I felt, even in the book, because those two things happen. He has the breakthrough, and you think, all right, this is going to change now. Things are going to change, and then he gets called, to go to the hospital, and the terrible thing happens. And that's what I wrote. I said, this is too much. It's too cruel. I mean, what happens with the family, what happens, with his wife and the baby, it is too much to bear. I think it was better, and not just because it has a more positive outcome, but we need something to hold on to. We need some hope here, so the film, I thought, gave us a little bit of that.
Yeah, I agree. I agree wholeheartedly on that. I thought the book was very like, wow, we're going to hit him over the head again, like in a deep way.
Too much. It was too much.
Scott, sorry, Kevin, I forgot to send you the trivia questions for the book and movie. Yeah, well, Scott usually does that for Book Bros.
Yeah.
Cliff from Cliff's Dark Gyms. Hope you have a great chat. Just popping in to say goodnight. He is from Australia.
No, South Africa.
Oh, that's right, South Africa.
Yeah.
Yes, you are right.
Yep.
South Africa. Brian, well, it was the 50s. If you make a controversial film without having an American flag to save the day, the communist accusations may start flying.
Absolutely, Brian. Yeah. Absolutely. Yep.
Yeah, and it was post World War II. So it makes sense.
Right.
There was one other difference I saw too, and I don't know if you saw, I don't know much about the lady. But so in the movie, the lady that played Miss Hammond was Margaret Hayes, and I know nothing about her as an actress. Way before my time. In the book, Miss Hammond is very young. Yeah. Margaret Hayes as an actress looked very like mid-30s. Daddy's wife in the movie looked very young.
Yes, she did.
There's a huge difference visual. And I'm assuming that the lady that played Miss Hammond in the movie was a very well-known actress. And so it put a lot of cachet into the movie for her being that character. Yeah. But she looked far too old compared to the book.
No, you're absolutely right, because I was just looking at who all the actors and actresses were. And Anne Francis plays Anne, the wife.
Yes.
And she was born in 1930. So she would have been 25 when this film was made, which is appropriate. She's a young, about to be, mother. Miss Hammond was played by Margaret Hayes. She was born in 1913.
Yeah, so, she was way older.
So in 1955, she was already 40s. Yeah. So she didn't, I thought the same thing. I was like, this is not what a new teacher looks like right out of school, coming to her first job. She was almost a middle-aged woman in the film. So
wow.
Which sort of adds to that whole, I don't know. She was not really this young, innocent, person. She's
Yeah.
a middle-aged woman.
Yeah. Nicole, my hubby and I were just talking about how people are aging differently. It's a stark difference. Yeah, for sure. For sure. Ghost Reader in the Sky. Going down a rabbit hole, I found this trivia. Glenn Ford starred in Cades County on CBS in 1971-72. That show was replaced in 72 by MASH.
Oh, wow. Wow.
Interesting.
Isn't that funny? Wow.
That's kind of like one of those small world kind of things.
Yeah, yeah. Wow.
Nicole's because smoking had a lot to do with it. Sean Connery was 32 when he did his first Bond film, but he looked like he was in his 50s.
Huh.
I would agree.
Wow.
I would agree.
Interesting. Yeah.
Did you have any more book movie kind of differences, or did you? We obviously both liked the movie.
Yeah, we did. We did, and I felt more hopeful at the end of the movie. I mean, I think the novel also wants us to think that he's not going to give up. He's going to come back. But the movie really made me feel that he had reached Miller, and Miller, let it be known, we have a pact here. I heard you were going to get transferred. I thought we were going to both stay, and it was like, that's what I needed that at the end of this. So I felt more optimistic at the end of the film.
Agreed. I did like too, in the book and the movie both had the part about where Miller's want to be an automotive because that's the color of my skin. That's what all I've got available to me. And he's like, no, you're smarter than that. You're a leader. You can do whatever you want. Don't you want more? And I thought that was a very interesting. That was a more positive kind of little section of the book that I thought it was really interesting. I'm glad it was in the movie as well.
Yeah.
So interesting.
One thing that I wanted to ask you, in the film, we really get the impression that those letters that are being written, and we don't know who's writing them.
Right.
We are in the film, we are led to believe that that's what causes her to go into labor, that she's so stressed and so upset. Did you get that same impression? No, that wasn't in the book.
Not in the book. Not in the book.
Yeah.
Not at all. The doctor in the movie made reference to she was very stressed. Something triggered it. And so,
And then that neighbor woman shows up with the letters.
Yes.
So,
she was, she was either, I was right. I was writing that down too. She was either, I couldn't remember if she was a neighbor or like a lady that came by to help out around the place.
I forget who.
But yes, because she had the discussion with her at the mailbox.
Right.
Yes.
Yeah. And then she hands the letters. Didn't she hand the letters
yes.
to Rick? Like, what are you doing?
Yes, she did. Yeah.
At one point in the book, when the letters first started coming, when we had no idea who was sending it, I actually thought for a little while, was it Miss Hammond? Was Miss Hammond sending the letters? Did you have that thought at all?
No, I was trying to decide if it was it or was it not Miller.
Okay.
I never thought about Hammond, honestly.
Okay. Because she's turned into such a seductress that I thought, oh my God, now she's going after his wife, but that clearly was not what was happening. So
thank you, Julie, for stopping by.
Thank you, Julie. Great to see you.
But yes, I thought when I was reading it, I was like, this has got to be Miller, I think, or maybe this is a red herring. It's not Miller. It didn't end up being Miller, but
I'm so glad it wasn't Miller.
Yeah, for sure. I thought Miller sent the letters. Yeah, Stewart was kind of with me. I was thinking that. Okay. I never thought about Hammond, but that would make a lot of sense, though.
Well, because she was being portrayed as going after him and trying to, she was definitely trying to have an affair with him, and he kept resisting her. So I thought, oh my God, is she trying to destroy his marriage? But because of the way she was being portrayed, but
do you remember in the book when Josh and her and Rick, Josh takes them home or takes them to the bus stop, and she's sitting in the middle, and their bodies are up against each other, like in the book. Yeah. She in the book, she gets bolder and bolder.
Yep, she does. She really does. It was, she was the seductress, and the wife was, this, angry, jealous, envious, woman who felt full of self-loathing. So
Yeah,
there were no good women in the book portrayals. So.
for sure. For sure. And this
But
one
I'm
also.
glad to hear that he got better at how he portrays women. So
Yeah, for what I read in the 87th Precinct, there is some really great women characters.
that's great.
Some really good ones.
That's great.
Um, what any other items that you wanted to talk about, topics that you want to talk about in this before I have a couple other things?
Go ahead. Go ahead.
Okay.
I'm sure you'll spark something that I want.
So favorite part of this book, for me, I think was kind of like the optimism of a new teacher, because it's so real. And I could connect with it, hearing Carly talk about, what she wanted to do with her first year. And,
Yes.
when she comes home and talks about, I had a rough day or I had a great day and why. Or like we talked about, when the kids will call me after they see the video, like, hey, we got the bonus questions right. Thank you. Like there's those little things mean so much. And I can see and relate to that optimism.
Yes.
So for me, that was my favorite part.
Mhm.
Obviously, my least favorite part of the book was, I think, the sexual assault, and I think this the portrayal of women, and I think obviously Josh, because I thought that was heartbreaking.
It
Yeah.
was.
What about you?
I think my favorite part was when he finally had the breakthrough with the class, when they were actually discussing, and it was a real discussion, and they were learning something, and they were relating it, they were able to relate their experiences to the class.
Right.
It wasn't just this abstract thing that I felt. I mean, it was so hard won. It was 400 pages into the book, but
Yeah.
loved that he had that. My least favorite was just everything that I've been saying about the portrayal of the women. And I mean, it didn't have a negative ending, but I wanted more hope. I wanted
Yes.
more hope from this, but I understand why we didn't have it. So.
Yeah. The ending definitely, it doesn't, you don't walk away warm and fuzzy.
No.
It's an interesting in that regard. So when I think, kind of reflect about it, for a book written in the 50s, that's pretty bold.
Yeah.
Especially when you're tackling the education system.
Right.
That's
he didn't leave us with a lot of hope.
No.
It was, yeah.
No.
And knowing that he was at least informed in writing this by his own brief teaching experience, which he gave up, that also contributes to the sort of pessimism of the story. It's not like he made a breakthrough and then went on to have this career as a teacher. Right. He gave up. I mean, he did bail on the system,
So it makes you wonder, is the character Josh more true to him and his experience?
Maybe. Yeah.
Yeah. Because I would think, Dadier being the main protagonist, like, you would think he would be more related to that character heavily about his experiences.
Great point. That's a great point. Yeah.
Yeah, it makes you wonder.
Yeah.
So
yeah, because Josh, like I said, getting beaten up didn't defeat him, but they're abusing the great love of his life, his records, his music, that did him in. And that was heartbreaking. That was heartbreaking.
So I know you don't rate your books, but would you give this, it's okay, it's good, you recommend it, not recommend it?
I thought it was good. I mean, I don't rate.
I know. I'm putting you on the spot here.
Yeah, no, but given the problems that it had, which we've shared, I mean, I do think it's an important book, because I think it did start a kind of train in fiction. I mean, people do write about the classroom. People do write novels about, teaching difficult kids, or, difficult teachers. So I think it's important. So, I don't know who I would recommend it to exactly, though.
Yeah.
I would recommend it with all of these warnings about, how the women are portrayed.
Yeah.
But I knew that going in. I had heard Ollie talk about this book a long time ago, and he said that there was something problematic, and he may have told me that personally too. So I knew that something was going to happen, that was going to be very uncomfortable. What I wasn't prepared for was the sexualization of the assault. I wasn't prepared for that, but and that was disappointing.
Sure. That's a good point. I think I too wasn't really. I think I was ready for the violence. I think I was ready for something, but I was thinking more of, like more 90s and 2000s, like movies where they talk about inner city kids and learning and everything. I was thinking more towards those kind of like movies this book was going to be about, but it's far darker.
Yes, it is. It is. I mean, there's almost nothing in the book about actually teaching, because he gets, distracted inside, just taken off course in almost every class. Like, remember the class where he brings in the tape recorder and he wants to, he gave up. I mean, as soon as they gave him a hard time, he was just like, all right, forget it. We're not doing this, and there was that. And then there was the class, where he actually did finally break through, but there was very little about what he was trying to teach, and how they derailed him along the way. So I wanted more of that. I wanted more of, what lessons did you try to bring in? What did you try to do? And we didn't get enough of that. But.
Yeah, I agree. The one where they did the recording and he was talking about, you need to learn how you sound because you probably don't realize how you do sound.
Right.
And that's interesting too, because when I first started doing videos, that was one of the reasons I did it. Is like, I think public speaking, being able to stand up, and even if it's at a camera, it is a lost art as people text everything and everything else. And you don't know what you sound like. You don't know how many times you use or you pause, or, and I thought that was an interesting kind of classroom lesson. And they obviously make it into a big laughing stock, and but he does give up way too quick.
Yeah, that's what I wrote in the margin. You're giving up too quickly. But, I wanted more of his classroom struggles beyond the violence and all that. I wanted, but that's the teacher in me that wanted to see the English teacher actually try to teach some English. And, we didn't really get very much of that, but
Brian says, duty calls, great job to you both. I enjoyed listening. I'm very curious about the book now. Have a great week, everyone. Thanks, Brian.
Thanks, Brian.
Do blackboards still exist? That's a great question. I will tell you from my experience.
Okay, and I'll tell you mine.
When I was in school, they did. Nowadays, it is smart boards and whiteboards.
Correct. Yeah. And I was actually obviously I started teaching when they were blackboards, and I remember when they started little by little taking them out of classrooms and replacing them with whiteboards, and most rooms also had a smart board. But I remember when it happened. I remember the principal who brought them into our school, finally took out the last blackboard. I mean, it wasn't that long ago.
Yeah, for sure. So anything else you want to talk about this book?
This is great. I love this. This was a wonderful experience.
Yeah, it was. So what's next for you? Anything exciting that you're reading right now? Anything you want to share?
Well, I've been judging the BookTube prize.
Okay.
With the first round of that. So I'm finished with the first round. We're wrapping it up next week. And that was so hard for me because you have to rank them. You have to say, what's your favorite? What's your sixth, fifth, fourth, third, second, first, so that's hard for me to do. So
did they give you like, here's an outline to use, or here's a guide. So you had to create your own, okay, how was the plot, the pacing, or did you kind of go by how you felt? How did you?
I mean, I go by, you know,
Is
how
that
I
fair to
judge
ask?
literature in general, you know, like did the,
Okay,
you know, how was the plot constructed? You know, what's the, I mean, of course I go by how I feel. I mean, if I'm finding a book painful to read, it's not going to be my number one book, you know, but,
sure,
uh, no, you know, you're basically, I'm judging them the way I judge any book, but it's just that I don't normally read 6 in a row and then put them in a rank order, you know,
gotcha,
so
gotcha.
that's something I've been, you know, very busy with, but I'm done with the first round. My real life in-person book group is meeting tomorrow, so I just finished a novel for that. We read Patrick Ryan's Buckeye, which is a newish novel.
Okay,
I've been reading a little bit for the March on the Rails. I just finished an Agatha Christie, Mystery of the Blue Train. And I'm reading a Clifford D. Simak novel.
science fiction.
Yeah, because we're keeping the Simak reading group going that Sean D. Standfast had started,
Okay,
and we're going to be meeting in a live stream, I think, next Saturday to talk about our next book. Our next book in the, let me just see. The next one up is, I think, Time is, I forget what it's called. Hold on a minute. Because I just started it this weekend. Hold on.
you're fine. Scott says I vacuumed the entire house, put my laundry away, and did some dishes all during the discussion. Very
Oh boy,
productive.
very good.
And
So
then Stuart said, "Thanks for this chat. I was tempted to DNF this book at points. Knowing the chat was coming caused me to complete it. Despite its problems, I'm glad I read it." Same. I feel the same, Stuart.
me too. Me
Yeah.
too.
So you were saying the Simak book.
The for this month is Time is the Simplest Thing, which is a
Okay.
first time read for me. I never read this one before. So
Awesome.
how
Let me
about
ask you.
what are you reading? Oh, go ahead.
Yeah, no, I'll tell you. So before I do, did you enjoy doing the ratings from 6 to 1? Did you enjoy that process?
No.
No. Okay.
No. And I've done I've judged before. I judged 2 years ago. And while you know, I definitely have an obvious favorite, I found it very hard. I find it very hard to, in some ways with this batch, which I'm not supposed to talk about till after the round is over.
Sure.
So I won't talk about titles, but I felt like I was comparing apples and oranges. Like they were so different that it was, you know, I didn't hate anything that I read. I did love a couple of them, but
So then you probably felt like some of them fell into more of your personal style and
yeah,
wants, and those are going to score higher
yeah, exactly.
because yeah,
And that's hard too. But and then, you know, like 2 were definitely not. You know, so they were not going to score as high. But I didn't have any, you know, like bad books this time.
gotcha.
But they were just so different that it wasn't, you know, it wasn't like comparing 6 mystery
Sure.
novels, you know.
Sure.
So yeah.
I recently read Killer's Choice, which was the 5th book in the 87th Precinct series.
Okay.
I'm doing that one book a month that Ollie challenged it over the next 4 years or whatever.
Right.
And so I have a couple coming up. There's a couple coming up, obviously. I think it's book 8 or something like that, where I've already read 1 or 2. And so I will get to skip those months, but I had to read book 5. I loved it. So
Great.
I'm eager for book 6 to come to read that next month. I read Those Who Wish Me Dead by Michael Corita, and I really liked it. I actually gave that to my mom to read. I am reading, I almost finished with Bloodwork by Michael Conley, which is
Okay.
book 7 in the Harry Bosch universe. It is great. I've actually seen the movie adaptation that starred Clint Eastwood. And I think it's Jeff Daniels is in it too, I think. But the book's really, really good. And I watched that movie so long ago that it's not really like spoiling it or anything.
Yeah.
And then I'm getting ready to start Trail of the Mountain Man, which is book number 3 in the Last Mountain Man series by William W. Johnstone, which is a Western. And it's, yeah, I'm really excited about it. And then I have a Donald Westlake book that I'm probably going to get to as well.
Okay.
Yeah.
I want to ask you one question before we wrap up. Alan from Alan's Reads and Lecton from Reading from the Depths are doing it. They've been reading, or they're planning to read Stephen King. I guess in April they're going to be reading The Talisman.
Yeah.
I guess there's a second book, and then there's a third one that's just going to come out.
Yeah, so there's a third one that's coming out. And so yes, there's The Talisman is book number 1. Black House is the sequel.
Okay.
And so many people are really excited about this because book 3, it has Traveling Jack. Jack is in book 1 and 2, and it's supposed to be very tied to the place and setting of the Dark Tower kind of multiverse. So yes, The Talisman is on my list for 2026. So I'm probably going to get to read that and reread it, and then reread Black House in preparation for book number 3.
And this is Stephen King with
Peter. It's Stephen King and Peter Straub, I believe.
Right. Yes. Right. Okay. Yeah. Well, so they're reading, they're going to do these together. And they asked me if I wanted to join them. And at first I thought I had too much going on. And then The Talisman was available on my Kindle for like $2.99, which they do sometimes, like with the first in a series, to get you, especially with the third one coming. Sure. So now I said, well, let me start it, and I'll see if I get hooked, because then I will join you. But I wanted to ask you about it.
It's one of the books that, like, the constant readers of Stephen King are very decisive on. Like, there's not a lot of middle ground. They either like it or they don't.
Okay.
I liked it. I thought it was great. It's portal fantasy. And so it's also kind of a coming of age about this young kid that has an ability.
Yeah, that's what I
so
thought.
Like it's an interesting read, and there's antagonists, and I liked it.
Okay.
There's some really interesting characters that they read, because he goes back to this other world, and this other world is almost medieval.
Oh.
And so it's really interesting. Like,
okay.
Yeah, there's a really good amount of characters that even they're small kind of characters, but they're really, really good.
So the people who don't like it, why do they not like it? Because it's more fantasy?
It's a big book, I think, is a lot. Like, it's one of those books that King wrote that's a huge tome.
Yeah.
And so pacing can be for people. But if you're wanting to get invested, it's a really good one.
Okay. I mean, I think it's almost 800 pages long.
Yeah, it's a big one. But I was engaged. I really liked it.
Okay. Well, I'm going to give it a try and see if I get hooked, and then I'll read with them. But if not, I'll just.
Yeah, I think it's worth a shot. I know you do McKee. I was really excited for you to read that, and that one kind of was.
No, I loved that right up until the last. I don't know, the last section of it. I just thought it went in a totally different direction.
Yeah, King can't end books to save his life. He's got these great ideas. He'll get you going, and you are all in. And then how do I wrap this up? Because you got all these characters, and even like The Stand, which is his, biggest book, and it's huge, but there's so many characters. How do you wrap it all up?
Yeah. No, I loved Duma Key. I was totally in. I loved the characters. I loved the whole art thing that was going on. But then it just became, this story about this, monster from the sea. And I was like, where did that come from? I just felt like the end was like the end to a different book. I don't know. And Renee, I was reading it with Renee. She had the same feeling. What just happened here? So. Yeah. But people have disagreed with me about that. Some people said they really loved the way he wrapped that one up. So I don't know.
Yeah, it's decisive.
Yeah.
So
anyway,
I enjoyed this.
Me too. This was really fun. We have to find something else we can read together in the.
I know. We both were like, why have we taken so long to do this?
I know. It's like I talk to Kevin all the time. How have I never read a book with him? So
yeah,
this was a perfect one for us to read.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think there was a lot of great topics. I think it hit home, especially for you and for me. And
Absolutely.
so, even though we didn't agree with a lot of some of the stuff, I think it made for a great discussion. So
Me too. Me too. Thank you.
awesome! Thank you very much, Pat, for the buddy read. Thank you, everyone, for tuning in.
Yes. Thank you
And
for
we
being
are done.
here. Okay.
All right.
Take
Thank
care.
you.